us. We are going to get started. If you wanted to find a spot closer, you can, but you can also just chill there. My name is Dr. Tapring Michelle Picato, and I'm the Executive Director of National Science Policy Network, which you didn't even know that you were a part of by just simply being here. Everyone that is interested in science policy or is a scientist or is in policy or exists in the world that needs things that are done by policy or science, which is all of us, are NSPNers. We have created this opportunity called Politics Aside, Policy Forward, to connect scientists, policymakers, and the public with hot topics. So the topic that we have for you today is on healthcare and AI. We've been to New York in the spring, and we talked about psychedelics and drug policy. We're going on to DC to talk about government efficiency. We're going to move that one. We're going to move on to data centers and energy use and infrastructure in Atlanta. And then we're going to end the year in Chicago talking again on this hot topic of AI, healthcare, and innovation, and what it means to our society and how we have challenges and opportunities to thrive. So at NSPN, National Science Policy Network, we have civic scholars and civic fellows, and we have partnered today at BU with our civic science fellows, and they are going to be doing the rest of this presentation and moderation and having an opportunity to facilitate this great conversation. So join me in thanking Aaron and Sai as your facilitators and panel moderators for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. T. Before we go right at it, I'd like to do a very quick welcome and thank you to all our panelists. I'm sure I'll get them right, but Dr. Batman, please give him a round of applause. Senator Oliveira, Dr. Haider, Representative Kilcoyne, Dr. Neyarapally, and Senator Moore. So I know I wouldn't do a great justice if I am talking about them for a very long time. So I'd like to hand it over to you so that you can have a couple of minutes to introduce yourself and tell us what you do best. We'll start with Dr. Batman. The mics are right in front of you.
All right. Thank you for organizing this event and invitation. So my name is Kayhan Batmanghelich. I'm assistant professor in Boston University, electrical engineering and biomedical engineering. My area of research is specifically about AI in healthcare. I've also previously been a faculty in medical school, University of Pittsburgh. Although I appreciate the provocative title of this panel, my area of research is not replacing doctors, but the focus of my research is developing AI methods that can help clinicians in clinical decision support so that they can focus on patients. And also the second prong of my research is developing AI methods that can go through a lot of data sets and find a pattern for disease modeling, patient stratification as a basic researchers. Also, I have some efforts in commercialization, but I'm sure my panelists here who are coming from industry can tell you more about it. I'm here to put my academic hat on.
Thank you. I'm Jake Oliveira, and I represent the Hamden, Hampshire, and Worcester district, which is about an hour and a half west of here. So in the Pioneer Valley part of Massachusetts, the greater Springfield area, represent around 175,000 residents that live within the district. Prior to joining the Senate, I served one term as a member of the House. They kicked me out and moved me over to the Senate. There's a joke among senators and reps that when a rep becomes a senator, the collective intelligence of both chambers goes up. That's more of a House thing that's said more than anything else. But it's an honor to be here today to talk a little bit about a very timely topic, something that we're all trying to grapple with. And if you understand anything about politics, you'll understand pretty quickly that politics tends to be very reactionary and usually a few years behind where the technology and the industry is. And I think all of us in public life life, whether it's myself, Rep. Kilcoyne, or Senator Moore, who's here today, we always try to stay up to date with the technology that is advancing in various fields. When you look at the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and our major industries, they really are reflected across this panel today. It's in higher education, it's in medical research. That's what Massachusetts does. We're not a state that has many natural resources. We don't have a state that is a strong leader in manufacturing, but what we are a leader in is developing minds and technology. And that's why this area is such a focus, I think, for the Massachusetts legislature and for policymakers throughout the nation and across the world. I will say when we get into the questions a little bit later, we can dive in some of the policy areas. But I will say, as a way of introduction, I do not sit on the healthcare committees now, but last session I served as vice chair of the Public Health Committee. In this session, I am chair of the Labor and Workforce Development Committee. And in fact, one of our volunteers here testified before the committee on heat standards for employment and making sure that we take into account the needs that our workers have when they're facing extreme temperatures. So a lot of this kind of comes into play when we're talking about the technology that we're using and how it affects the workforce here in Massachusetts. Thank you again to BU for hosting and for having us as part of this panel.
Thank you, Senator. My name is Adil Haider. I'm a trauma surgeon and I guess a public health scientist and have been in academia for about 20 years, including being dean of a medical college overseas. I am from Boston. I moved from here to go run a medical school for about 6 or 7 years and have just come back after being inspired by really the potential of artificial intelligence. And I'm now working on building an AI agent that is able to talk to a patient, take a good history of the patient, and then present all that information to the physician so the physician can spend more time on really rich conversations with the patient, listen into the conversation, scribe everything, and then have a after visit summary so the patient can stay on track. We've built the agent. It's done with clinical trials. It's worked with 4,000 or 5,000 patients already, and we're seeing really substantially improved outcomes and lots of patient satisfaction with it. So I'm happy to talk about how my experience with sort of building things and doing research to see how they work, how that can now, I think, help with really improving health outcomes, especially for vulnerable populations, and using AI as a big solution towards achieving health equity.
Is this on? Okay, works. Hello, everybody. My name is Meg Kilcoyne. I am a state representative in the Massachusetts House. So I serve alongside both Senator Oliveira and Senator Mike Moore over here in the Massachusetts legislature. And I'm really excited to be here to talk to you about legislation that I've been working on alongside the senator for a number of sessions now regarding biomarker testing. And one thing I think we'll delve into this more with the questions, so I don't want to get too into the weeds here, as the senator mentioned as well, but one thing I found working on this bill is it covers an area that everybody has had some sort of personal connection to, whether it's cancer, rare disease, Alzheimer's, whatnot. And I've found that one, aside from the important impact it would have on so many lives in healthcare in Massachusetts, I found that it's also been sort of a bridge to inspiring people who might not be inclined to get involved in policymaking, who may be intimidated by politics, to try to take action and how they can help. I've worked on this bill for several sessions now, and every time I speak of it, whether it's a local event, whether it's in Boston, wherever I am, there's always somebody that wants to see this happen to make sure everybody has equitable access to the best care possible. And I think that it does show the difference that different stakeholders can make in terms of getting involved. And hopefully we'll shed some light on that for all of you that might be interested in maybe working more towards policy. But before, again, I don't want to step on the toes of the questions and get moving here, but just so you know a little bit about me, I was elected to the Massachusetts House in 2020. I represent 6 communities in central Massachusetts, just north of Worcester, which is similar to the region that Senator Moore also represents. And I've in my 3rd term at the State House, so relatively early in my term, I actually had the honor of getting running at the same time and getting elected at the same time as Senator Oliveira during the COVID pandemic, no less. Thanks for the reminder. So we certainly had a interesting introduction to becoming lawmakers, how that impacted policy, and especially getting involved in healthcare work really was things were very much rapidly shifting, and they still are. And so that always is going to provide challenges. But we're finally, I think, served a couple terms, learning a bit more how the process works has certainly, I think, benefited my ability to get things done, both for my constituents and hopefully moving policy forward. But when I first started working on the bill, it was my first term. I filed it January of 2021. And because biomarker testing was a relatively new technology, the bill that we filed only is very narrow in scope. The language that I had filed 5 years ago only ensured insurance coverage for stage 3 and 4 cancer patients. But we found that there was so much momentum in that first term that so many other states across the nation were starting to pass this. And this wasn't something that is really a red or Democratic or Republican issue. There's states that are more Republican leaning that have passed it, states that are more Democratic leaning have passed it as well, that we decided to become more aggressive in the approach that we were using. And we expanded the language to become disease agnostic, because as the technology was becoming more and more used by providers and healthcare, we realized that we have to make sure that we're ensuring as many people that can benefit can get access to this treatment as much as possible. So in my second term, we filed the stronger language. And we refiled the same language this session. And while it hasn't passed yet, we've really seen an incredible increase in support among our colleagues. And I've gotten a chance to get more involved in healthcare policymaking, as this term I was assigned to the Healthcare Financing Committee. So this bill is certainly in a lot of conversations we're having on the changing landscape, both nationally and within the state of healthcare. And, but myself and the senator, we get to focus on trying to make sure everybody has access to biomarker testing as the main sponsors of this bill. So I'm really excited to be here with you, hoping for a dynamic conversation, and I'm looking forward to the questions that you might have.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'm now really curious about the details of this bill. It very much relates to what I do. I'm Tom Neyarapally. I'm the CEO of Archetype Therapeutics. We're an AI native drug discovery company, and we actually start from biomarkers from patients as the starting point of our drug discovery process. So that's why I was listening keenly as you started to unfold all the details about this bill. My background is really a lifetime in life sciences, starting all the way back. My dad was a Pfizer guy for 30 years in southeastern Connecticut, so I grew up in the pharmaceutical industry. Was a chemical engineer at UConn, was a management consultant at the oldest consulting firm here in Boston, A.D. Little, and then went to grad school at Cornell, got a law degree and an MBA, but that was not the interesting part of my time there. The interesting part, and this was 25 years ago, is that I met these crazy physics grad students that wanted to apply math and computing to cancer, which maybe that doesn't sound so crazy today in 2025, but in 2000 at the completion of the Human Genome Project, that was an ambitious undertaking. I really liked what these kids were doing. I helped them get money to get that company started, and then after 4 years of racking up a bunch of debt, I figured I should go be a lawyer. I trained to do that. I was a lawyer in New York for 4 years in corporate intellectual property law, and then said, I'm not passionate about being a partner in a law firm. I want to go work on this startup that's trying to solve cancer. And so moved back here to Boston and worked in that same startup, those kids from Cornell that had moved to Boston. 9 years there, and then left to help start a biomarker company in New York, out of Mount Sinai, the hospital there. We took the genetic testing lab there, turned it into a company. I was the chief commercial officer. We went public in 2021. And so this is really a kind of a 25-year arc of working really in biomarkers and using biomarkers as part of a drug discovery process. So it kind of goes hand in hand. do the biomarkers to figure out whether patients need care. If those biomarkers say patients aren't going to benefit from existing therapies, what do we do for them? That's where my company comes in. We use AI to discover drugs for patients where biomarker sets predict that those patients are not going to fare well on existing drugs. So it's a nice kind of complementarity between myself and other folks on the panel. Nice to meet everybody. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Senator Michael Moore. I represent the 2nd Worcester District, which is southern 40% of the city of Worcester and the lowest surrounding towns. I've been in office now since 2009. I've served as committee chair for the Joint Committee for Higher Education for about 6 years, and actually that's where I met Senator Oliveira when in another life when he was working in the higher education field. Public safety, I was chairman of the Public Safety Committee, and now I've been the last 3 years chairman of the Advanced Information Technology, Internet, and Cybersecurity Committee. Sadly, I agree with Senator Oliveira on the legislature. We're very reactive. I always say that we need a crisis or a tragedy to get the legislature to move. And trying to, I guess, avoid that, about 8 years ago when we had, I think it was Senate President Rosenberg, that I went to him and asked if we could create a special task force to study cybersecurity, which we then did. He then did. I chaired that, and we issued a report. And at that point, AI was not even being discussed. I did not ask for the committee. When I reckon the part of the committee, the task force recommended we create a committee looking at cybersecurity. And then it wasn't until Senator Spilka became Senate President that she actually, they were looking for new policy initiatives or committee ideas that we could try to make sure that the legislature stays, I guess, proactive in what we're looking at for policy initiatives. And I recommended that we create a committee on cybersecurity. That's when, although I did not ask for the committee until this 3 years ago. And when I did ask for it, it was really looking at cybersecurity, because I saw so many different things. We had a lot of personal data that was being breached. Companies just didn't seem like there was enough firewalls protecting people's individual information. Got the committee assignment, and literally within a month or a month and a half, AI came on the scene and just exploded. So it really, a lot of the focus of the committee now in the last 3 years has really kind of left cybersecurity and cyber type issues behind. And there's legislation dealing with AI in every aspect of our lives. And I think that's one thing that we have that we're finding in the committee, that we've got AI in healthcare, we've got AI in workforce, in hiring. You look at law enforcement. So every part of life that we're looking at, AI is intersecting with. So the committee now, I really find the work is interesting, what we're looking at, because we're delving into so many different policy areas. That we even have a piece of legislation right now dealing with robotics, that the robotic industry has come to us on. And I kind of jokingly to my staff, like, this is like the Terminator bill. It deals with prohibiting robots from having weapons. If someone had ever said to me 20 years ago that I would be in the legislature and we'd be banning robots from carrying weapons or having weapons, I'd be laughing. I would have said, it's not happening. But this is an issue that the industry has come to us on. So I can't tell you there's, as Senator Oliveira talked about, our economy, life sciences, education, healthcare, these are the driving factors. And I think the issues that we have to deal with in the committee is looking at how do we establish the appropriate, now we were talking about this before this, the term that people utilize today is guardrails. How do we establish appropriate guardrails on AI. Now, jokingly, I when I hear the term guardrails, I laugh because they're really talking about regulation. But regulation is a bad word. Industry does not want to say here, we want to create regulation on the industry. Oh, it's going to hinder innovation. It's going to hinder research. So they use the word guardrails. So this is just some of the terminology that we have to deal with when we're dealing with industry on the direction we're going to go and how do we establish the appropriate guardrails and making sure that there's no bias. There's no that. If you think back to when computers first started integrating society, what they say, junk in, junk out. Well, that's still the theme today. If it's junk in, junk out that AI is basing their opinions on, what's the result going to be? So this is why it's so important that as policymakers, we make the right decision and put the right guardrails on what can be done with AI, and that we make sure that there's going to be a human oversight of it. It's great to have AI and have this technology, but we got to remember that AI doesn't have the compassion, doesn't have other types of human characteristics that are going to be so vital in making sure that society moves forward in the appropriate way. So thank you, and you up?
I this year. Thank you, Senator Moore. There was a common theme. Everyone talked about it being a revolution of sorts. So the AI revolution is certainly here. We had COVID revolution, which changed a lot, and the AI revolution is now here. So are we being proactive or reactive is definitely a question. So the first question I have, we'll do a little back and forth between the academic industry panelists and the representatives. So for my first question for the academicians and industrialists is, what do you think is the real impact of AI in healthcare right now? Dr. Batman, would you like to go first?
So I think, in my opinion, we don't have a coherent AI policy yet, let alone the tailor to healthcare. And I think it's okay because usually policy trails the innovation. I think it's better to talk about what do we need from a new healthcare policy. So what are the groups that we want our policy to serve? I think there are two groups. One are the patients, of course. And at the end of the day, you want to come up with a policy that improves the outcome being better treatment for the patients and better outcome, higher survival. And I think AI get involved in every step of the way. For example, Tom, I'm sure, can tell you more about AI method developing better drugs that can be personalized to the patient and many others. Also, the second group is non-patient. I think part of our healthcare, perhaps, is a good chance to push it toward prevention. And AI, for example, can be involved in screening. And we know that the screening put a lot of burdens on clinicians. AI can reduce the burden of the clinicians. But the other groups that AI can be important for is the general public. In terms of non-patient, I think AI produces a lot of opportunities for our economy as a whole, and produce different kinds of jobs and better jobs, perhaps. And this is, to me, this is the third aspect of involvement, the part that AI policymakers should think about it. In my opinion, AI policy should be less about algorithm and mostly about who's going to benefit and who's going to be left out. But I'm sure our policymakers can tell you more about it.
Am I the only physician, practicing physician on the panel?
Yes,
Okay, all right. Your old job, all right. I think since you ask, where AI is going to make a difference in how we take care of patients, I think you started, really explaining it right. I mean, it's going to be all throughout the drug discovery pipeline. So how we treat patients, it's going to be, how we perform robotic surgery, for example. AI will help us do it better. Even colonoscopy, you're talking about prevention. AI is now being used to improve our ability to do a colonoscopy, see things that we hadn't seen before, and so on. So I think it's going to enhance a lot of the therapeutics we do. Something that I'm working on very specifically is how it's going to enhance the doctor-patient relationship to improve outcomes and so on. Lots of things are there. What's not there is the regulations to support all of this. And this is where we're looking to our legislators to that, right? So, for example, right now, the primary way we, and of course, doctors are motivated by many things, but one thing they all have to work on is, how we bill for things, because we all have to, we all have bean counters that are asking us what we've billed and so on. And the primary way things are billed is actually based on time and not quality of care. And now with AI, the whole point is to, use AI tools to improve the quality of care. And it may actually be faster for us to do that. So what would happen is you get penalized for providing better quality of care, because now your time is spent in a different way than it was before, right? And so it's very important for the policies to keep up with how we actually do practice. And the trouble is that this takes so long that we're going to find the rest of the world far ahead of us. And a lot of those therapeutic benefits we will not be able to give to patients here in the United States, even with a lot of technology being developed here, just because our regulations and our policies are too far behind. And I think that's the biggest issue that I see. Another opportunity, though, is that we try so hard to decrease the cost of healthcare. We're always worried about how many people are going to be insured or not insured. And whereas Massachusetts has been a leader, especially with the Affordable Care Act and how that's been implemented across Massachusetts, and the number of uninsured in Massachusetts, obviously, we're all very proud of how we have much better access to healthcare as a state compared to other states across the nation. AI, I think, will help us do even more and improve health equity. Again, we won't be able to get there unless the legislatures, both at the state level and federal level, keep up with the time. So I think that's where, at least practicing physicians look towards the legislature to make sure that we are evolving as fast as the technology is evolving.
I'm not going to comment on AI specifically. I will leave that to the expert here in the legislature to my left. But I did want to just take a note to kind of build off what you're saying a little bit in terms of challenges in policymaking. And as we've kind of touched on before, as policymakers, that is always going to be a challenge that we have, in that our process is designed to be deliberate. And that doesn't always coincide with the rapid growth of technology. I talked a little bit earlier about biomarkers and how the rapid, seeing the use that it can have for patients facilitated us to be a bit more aggressive in policymaking. But that still means this bill has been already on its third term, and many bills take far longer than that to get done. And to give you some insight in terms of how we have to think about this, why it can sometimes take a long time, a while, is that we don't get to look at issues all the time in a bubble, even healthcare ones. In Massachusetts, we deeply care about the cost of healthcare, but in order to get any policy done that's healthcare related that could have an impact on costs, it doesn't just have to go through the legislature. It usually has to be studied by a organization called the Health Center, Commonwealth Health. What does CHIA stand for again? It's the Center for Health Information Analysis, CHIA. So they have to look at every single bill that may be moving forward in the legislative process. And this is before it's even released out of our committees to see what kind of fiscal impact it might have on the Commonwealth. And we take this analysis seriously. It's not a political organization. It's independent from the legislature, but it gives us tools so we understand how this is going to impact it. Because all of us, I think, want to see everybody have the access to the greatest care possible. We want to cover everything. I know I want to, but an unintended consequence can have huge ramifications on other areas. For instance, and I think both the senators probably dealt with this in your districts as well. Healthcare costs skyrocketed over shifting uses of various, especially GLP-1s, and municipalities, like the state, have to make their budgets work. They don't get to take out a deficit like the federal government does, nor do we as a state. So suddenly you had, things like school districts who have to cover insurance for all their employees suddenly saw their budgets raised by 21%. And so that means municipalities have to go and decide, are we going to make cuts such as firing teachers at our schools, firing town employees, or are we going to see if the local voters will approve what's called a 2.5 override, meaning approving raising taxes by over 2.5%, which then they come back to us and demand more money from the state, but we don't always have the ability to do that. So what we are challenged with in the legislature, whether it's AI, whether it's healthcare, but always as it relates to healthcare, is how do we do this in a way that we know that we want to make sure that we are a leader in providing as much healthcare access to everybody as possible. But how do you make that work? Because we are forced to balance the books, both at the state and municipal level every year. So I kind of wanted to just jump in and say that so you guys have an idea sort of how that process on our end works, because I think all of us would like to just say, like, yes, everything covered all the time, but we have to make a strong case every time, and we have to be ready to defend why something that could increase costs is worth doing, or how do we make this work with the finances that we have before us. And I don't want to jump in now because this is an AI related question, but when we get into the specifics of what our work on the biomarkers, we can talk a little bit more about that too.
Just to build upon what Representative Kilcoyne's talking about, there's 6,800 bills filed this year. So this is when about how deliberative the legislature has to be. So every bill has to have a hearing. So the only, this is where you'll hear the general public come back and say, hey, this bill's common sense. You guys should have passed this in a week. Well, it's common sense to you, but there's 200 legislators, 40 senators, and 160 state representatives. What I think is common sense isn't necessarily what someone else thinks is common sense. And then you've got the committee chairs. They have to review a bill. I don't know if, I'm going to say, and my colleagues can correct me here, I don't know of any bill that when it's filed, so think of that 800 bills, if we pass 250 to 300 a year, that's a lot. But I don't know of any bill that's ever passed that was passed as originally written. It goes from the filing to the committees. Everyone on the committee has their input in changing the bill. Then it comes out of one committee, then it goes to Ways and Means, then it goes to the floor, and you could have 300 amendments filed. Then it's got to go from that branch to another branch. The process, when I first got elected, someone had described it to me as the process is purposely made so not many bills pass. Could you imagine us passing 1,000 pieces of legislation a year? What that would do to our everyday life. So there's that aspect. Dealing with, and as I said before, we're here for healthcare, but this is when we're looking at AI. And I thought of this when you were talking about the costs. Yes, and Rep. Kilcoyne talked about this, that everyone's for making sure, especially here in Massachusetts, we pride ourselves on the healthcare that we can provide people. But we want to make sure that it's not too expensive, that everyone has the access to it. And this is where AI, yes, it can be very instrumental in increasing access to healthcare. But for those of us who are a little older, when the Affordable Care Act was first passed, or the so-called Obamacare, the opponents of it, what was one of the biggest critiques? Well, besides increased costs, death panels. So now we have, and this is no matter what industry that we've gone to, that we talk about AI, the most critical component they talk about, it's the human oversight, to make sure it's not just about the numbers. It's, yes, you want the medical professionals to make that healthcare decision. Yes, this person does this, and this is what I talk about, the human characteristics that make us who we are. That it's the human there saying this person deserves this healthcare. It's not an AI system that's developed looking at the numbers saying, I'm 62. He's only 62. He's got 8 years left. Now we're not gonna waste our money on that. So this is finding that, I don't want to say balance, but this is what we have to look at. And another aspect that, and this goes again outside of the healthcare industry, when we look at AI, one of the biggest issues that we have is an infrastructure, and we saw it last year, was over the end of the winter, the enormous utility bills that people had to pay. AI requires so much energy. That's going to be one of the biggest hurdles we have, is expanding the electrical grid, or the grid in general, to handle the expansion of AI in healthcare, AI in whatever industry. And not to go on into, but when it was talked about jobs, one of our biggest industries in the country is transportation, long haul trucking, drivers. What are we moving to? We're moving to, this talks about, you had talked about jobs, and well, there's going to be more jobs. Well, are they going to be quality jobs? Because now you have 700,000 or 800,000 people in the industry of transportation that are no longer going to be driving trucks. It's going to be self-driving trucks. We're going to have Uber and Lyft, and all that's going to be self-driving. We already got the taxi cabs out coming, taxi services coming. So if you look, it's going to be a very difficult process going forward, integrating a full expansion of AI, meeting the workforce needs, and making sure that those jobs that are available are quality jobs. I know there's one company here in Mass that's already looking at, when I've toured the company, they're looking at developing robots to unload tractor trailers. So now we have autonomous tractors, trailers. We have robots that are unloading the trucks, and it could be medical devices, it could be whatever. So we have a lot of challenges that AI intersects so many different aspects of the policies that we're going to have to be looking at. But I think if we look at healthcare, it can be a critical component. In Illinois just passed some legislation making sure that dealing with therapeutic or counselors, that AI can be used, but it's got to have that human oversight with it. So this is where I think we get a balance, giving our medical industry the tools to do it, but we have that human involvement that we don't see that eliminated, and it's just a by the numbers type of evaluation.
Thank you, Senator. I do want to bring it back to Tom, because Erin still has a follow-up question on how you would respond to the policy requirements, but Tom is the expert here from the industry, so I want to know what do you think of AI's current impact in the industry?
Well, again, I think others have commented on this, but it's not monolithic. There are areas where AI has had a massive impact. So the world that I work in is drug discovery, and there's already a lot of things that AI is doing in drug discovery. Fortunately, and I've been on these panels 10 years ago, sitting on a panel with a billionaire saying there's going to be no more doctors and everything's going to be done with AI, which I think the senator is right, that there are people out there that kind of think things should go that way. I don't think things should go that way. We're not there yet on that side. I do want to comment on one thing that kind of sits at the intersection, and Senator Moore talked about this, is the data, the garbage in, garbage out comment. It's really true. AI is only as good as the data that comes into it. That's true about our healthcare system in general. So there are certain populations that don't get the biomarker testing that they need. I'm guessing that that's something that you're trying to address in the legislation, although I haven't read it. I know from my world that African-American populations are underrepresented in testing in prostate cancer, for example. So then if you're trying to analyze a data set from prostate cancer to discover new drugs, you may not actually be finding drugs that are going to be effective for certain populations. So this kind of thing is a problem if we don't have the right data coming in. The balance that gets complicated from my seat in dealing with this over the last 25 years is patients' concerns about privacy versus wanting that patient's data in the analysis to actually represent them. So that's a conflict from a legislative perspective. You're going to have some people freaking out about hey, I don't want my data ending up causing some insurance discrimination against me, which is understandable. It's a valid concern. And on the flip side, if that data is not in the analysis I'm doing, we're not discovering a drug for you. So I don't know how to solve that problem, but I'd say that's the kind of thing that you all get paid for, is how do we do that? From my perspective, as much data as possible is required in order for these tools to succeed, whatever the AI application is. In my world, we want as much patient, clinical, and genomic data. People get scared about that, though. But if we don't have that in these analyses, we are going to have substandard drug discovery relative to the rest of the world. So we have to kind of wrestle with that and figure it out.
Not to monopolize things, but we were actually looking at, so last legislative session, myself and co-chair in the House did a lot of research on data privacy legislation. Hopefully this fall, the Senate will be coming out with a comprehensive piece dealing with it. But dealing what you just talked about the information so that the industry can get it. What we have contained in the bill is really that allowing businesses or whatever industry to collect data reasonably necessary to their job function, to respond to the mission of that, whether it's the pharmaceutical company or whatever industry it is. And then they can't, whatever they get, they can't sell. Or it limits, there is actually an industry out there of data brokers. Their sole mission, job, is going around collecting people's personal information from different companies, and then they sell it and make money off of your information. So putting limitations on that, determining what sensitive data is. And this is where we need, instead of having an adversarial type relationship, this is where the legislature, we need the partners. We need the partners with industry to come to us and saying, okay, look, we understand you're trying to protect personal information, but this is what we need to be successful to make sure we can continue to research. The goal is not to stifle innovation. It's to make sure that we balance just what you're talking about, the privacy, that people don't want their information sold, but still giving you the correct data that you can move forward with the innovation or the research that you have to do.
Okay. So a question, I know the legislators have chatted a little bit, but we'd like your perspective on the interests in learning more about AI and how we can ensure that Massachusetts continues to be the healthcare and innovation hub for our nation. Because we have a huge biotech center here at Massachusetts compared to other many states. So, yeah.
I didn't answer the last question, so I'll take this one first. I just want to comment on a couple of things about AI technology and how outside of the medical field, it's already being integrated. When you look at each one of our offices that are here, Senator Moore has 5 staffers, I have 5 staffers, Rep. Kilcoyne has staff. Each one of our staff use AI technology on a daily basis, We have not, as a legislature, even caught up to it. We have certain members of the House and the Senate who are looking at it. In fact, the Senate just purchased an advanced AI technology through Microsoft right now to help with our offices. So all of us have comms teams that are in our offices, a comms director that puts out press releases, that posts on social media. My comms director utilizes AI as a tool each and every day for everything that we do in our office. Our legislative staff that works on developing legislation, in fact, one of our colleagues, Senator Feingold from Andover, wrote an entire bill using AI technology and on AI technology. So we're trying to kind of broach into it. We're already experiencing it ourselves within our own offices, and how to set up those, as Senator Moore said, the guardrails around it, and when it's acceptable, when it's not acceptable, when it's useful, but also giving out guidance to folks. Just as the industry leaders were talking about how we're incorporating it into our daily lives, I'm generating my own questions about how to do it. I mentioned to a few of the panelists earlier today, just about 3 hours ago, I had to go to an optometrist appointment. And I'm sitting there in the optometrist appointment, getting my eyes dilated. I can't see a thing, but I see my optometrist sitting at her computer station now struggling with entering information in there. And I said, what's going on? And she said to me, we just adopted an AI technology tool in our offices that we are now utilizing, and we've only had it for a week at this point. And so she's trying to do it. I'll give another example about how AI technology for the patient side is being impacted right now. My girlfriend, who utilizes ChatGPT more than anything else, if you have any problems in the world, she's going to enter it in there and it's going to, release something out. She takes her lab work that she gets and enters it into ChatGPT to interpret the data about her blood work. Patients are using it now as a tool to interpret data that they hear from their doctors. They're using it right now and they don't understand, no offense to physicians, but when they're telling you you have something, they will now take that information or that printout that you get at your doctor's office, and they will enter it into ChatGPT. So right now we don't only need to talk about it through the lens of the practitioner. We also need to understand that patients are now using it more and more than ever before. And it's really exciting, but also scary and challenging. And as policymakers, we need to continue to partnership with industry, with people out in the field, in order to get those guardrails in place that are necessary that Senator Moore mentioned. Senator Moore also said, he's 62 years old. For the Senate, that's middle age. So it's not too bad. He has plenty of years left in him. But as people are living longer and as people are utilizing technology to a greater extent than ever before, we're trying to find that balance of making sure that we don't stifle any type of innovation, but also making sure that we give guardrails to the people that are coming up, to our students that are in schools. We just passed a bill last week that banned these types of devices in most of our K through 12 public schools in Massachusetts. However, we probably need to do a better job of finding a way to incorporate that technology more within our schools and how to properly use it, how to be good digital citizens. And we don't have enough of those conversations about it because, as both I said and Senator Moore, the legislature is very reactionary. We see a problem and then we try to tackle it. We see a crisis, and LBJ had the famous line, never let a good tragedy go to waste. And policymakers usually don't. When there is a emerging technology, we begin to react to it. To Representative Kilcoyne's point about AI technology on saving dollars, I go to school groups, I talk to individuals, I talk to my constituents, and I usually ask them this question: what do you think the state spends your hard-earned tax dollars on most? Most people will say education, roads and bridges, transportation. 55% of the Commonwealth's budget is spent on healthcare. 55%. And that percentage increase is only growing right now. Meg mentioned before, Rep. Kilcoyne mentioned before, the GLP-1 drugs, right? I think earlier today it was announced that one of our biomedical research companies is coming out with an oral GLP-1 instead of the shots. And the shots, what we found in pricing is actually the delivery of the GLP-1s is the most expensive part of the actual delivery of it. So if we can move to an oral pill to take that instead of the delivery devices, we can begin to look at saving money. When we look at how healthcare is far outpacing revenue growth. So Meg mentioned, Proposition 2.5, that we can only grow our property taxes by 2.5% at the local level. Our own revenue as a Commonwealth that we mostly get from things like the income tax and capital gains, our state income is only growing by about 3.5%. Medical costs and healthcare costs to the Commonwealth, to our communities, to our businesses, is going up 8 to 9% a year. It is not sustainable. It is not able to, for any state in the country, and I wouldn't hold my breath, doctor, on the federal government getting involved with this. That's why the states are going to have to be taking the lead on a lot of these issues and being those laboratories of democracy and experimenting and working and trying to support these industries. And that's what we're looking at here with AI technology. We cannot go down the current path of the healthcare cost growth measures that we see. AI needs to be part of the equation. It needs to be part of it, not just for the delivery of it, but also for the cost that is burdening so many states, communities, and our country in general.
you can, if you had a comment, if I felt like you wanted to comment as well.
no.
Before, okay. Now, thank you so much. We've had a great hour. Now we're going to transition questions from you all to our panelists on anything that's pressing to your mind. And I know some of you are working in healthcare, some of you are students in healthcare and masters in public policy. So really anything that's on your mind, they're in the hot seat and ready to
I actually,
hear your
sorry, I
questions.
changed my mind.
Okay, absolutely. She's
So
giving you
just-
time to think.
Just before we get into the questions, I felt badly. I was remiss in not in the introduction explaining what the biomarker bill did. I have this thing when I go on panels. I get anxious about getting ahead of the questions. So, and if you haven't already learned this, legislators tend to not need. We don't put many guardrails on ourselves when we are speaking. So I try very hard in the intro to sort of give a brief interview, but I think I was remiss in not explaining for those that might not be aware of what the biomarker bill that myself and the senator filed does. I spoke about it a little bit, but just in case any of you were wondering, it's not really directly related to the AI conversation we're having, but what our bill would do basically in Massachusetts right now, many private insurers will cover something called biomarker testing if your providers feel that it's an important test that they need to make sure that you're getting the best care possible. We have seen many patients, survivors of cancer, of other rare diseases that have found that when they were able to access biomarker testing, they were able to rule out what kinds of treatments might not be the most effective and figure out what was going to be able to, based on their genetic biomarkers, tell their doctors what was going to be the best treatment for them. So this is a really important step in medical technology and precision medicine that I'm sure that the doctors could explain better than I could. I think Senator Moore, you might have talked about this earlier. Like we as legislators, we have to be experts in many different things. My background is not in medicine or science. I was a history major. I worked a lot in policy. So while I'm not an expert in genetic medicine and precision medicine, I do understand the human life impact of it. And so when this bill was presented to me, what we discovered in Massachusetts is that while most patients can access, roughly 60% or so of patients in Massachusetts can access biomarker testing, at least 40% of both private insurers and Mass Health do not cover biomarker testing. And so what that means is that despite this technology being available, if you are under an insurance plan in Massachusetts or uninsured, the doctor may not even try to get access to biomarker testing because it'll take too much time to get the insurance company to facilitate what's known as prior authorization before they can administer it, or they are confident that it may not be covered. So they'll have to just forge ahead what they think without that critical data, what might be the best treatment for you. And with this bill, we believe that everybody in this Commonwealth should have access to this care. We believe that despite concerns around costs, it really can drive, it's not even just about improving healthcare outcomes, which in my opinion is the most important thing about the bill. We believe it actually will lead to cost savings down the line. Because if you know that a treatment might not work for you, you're saving thousands of dollars and not wasting time and money on treatments that you're going to have to start something else a few months down the road. And so we've seen this, and we've seen this in anecdotal stories that we work with people we work with the senator and I. We partner a lot with survivors of cancer, with patient advocates, and a young woman, her name is Molly. She's, I think, in her 20s now. But she was diagnosed with the same form of cancer that her grandfather was diagnosed and passed away from years and years ago. Unlike her grandfather, though, she was able to access biomarker testing and is now a survivor. And it's stories like that that I think highlight the human cost of this. But the senator and I have a job within the legislature that, while I don't think there's anything more important than the patient voice and the human cost of it, we do have to answer questions in terms of how the state is going to pay for it, as you were talking about earlier, Senator. And so just so you guys have an understanding of, I guess, why I'm on this panel in terms of the biomarker testing, why Jake and I, Senator and I, are working on it, is that's really what we're looking to do. And I know you do a lot of work in the biomarker space as well. So, you know far more about the importance and the science behind it than I would. But that's why we need to partner with people like you. And we've had so many incredible doctors in the medicine and medical community that come to explain to people, to lawmakers, to policymakers, what this can do, why it's so important. And we do believe that while we are working with the American Cancer Society on getting this bill done, we have seen support from rare disease groups, from Alzheimer's Association, because there's so much potential in care and quality of life. And I think when we're talking about healthcare, and we're talking about, there's so many, I think, people that assume that, oh, if you survive cancer, or if, you will be fine. But the treatment can wreak such havoc on the body that if you can get something less invasive that's going to work for you, you may have more time with your loved ones, with your family, with your friends. You may not, and you may have a better just quality of life moving forward. And you talk to cancer survivors, and they tell you stories of, even though they survived, the treatment was so difficult that they're left with so many other complications for the rest of their lives. I met a woman who was a breast cancer survivor who was trying to ask how she could help with this bill, because she was 42 years old, and due to the treatment she had, she's in the body of a 62-year-old woman. That's 20 years of her life that are now possibly gone. And so our hope is that we can use all of our partners in the medical community, in the patient survivor space, to show all of our colleagues in the House and Senate, of all the other stakeholders, and insurance companies included, that this may have some impact on costs, but we feel, and we've seen this in other states, that the costs are not going to be astronomical. And this is hard to quantify, and we're trying to get data on this from states that have passed it a few years ago. By preventing a trial and error approach to care and treatment, by being able to use this incredible technology to marry your care to your own genetic makeup, it's going to lead to a lot of cost savings down the line, and we're going to prevent a lot more issues, both in the post-treatment complications, and just not having to have a roadmap on what's going to be the most effective. So I just wanted to try to briefly, I know that was long-winded, I'm sorry, but I was trying to briefly explain what this bill does, what the senator and I have been working on. And I'm happy to answer, we're both happy to answer any more questions on that space too. And I do want to, Jake, Senator, if you wanted to jump in on anything too.
Meg, as always, you covered most of it right there. I will say the one kind of interesting thing, and what brought me to file this legislation, is the ability for us to kind of put this out there as a public policy, catch up to the other states that have already done it, and also allow for the innovation that is continuing to be developed there. When Meg started this bill, it was started with cancer research. Now we have the Alzheimer's Association. I met a volunteer that was here that's in the public health school looking at how biomarker testing can help with other areas. I mean, it is exploding right now. But I think for us as policymakers, we're constantly hearing from constituents on how quality of life needs to be improved, and the quality of life of a biomarker test that can determine a treatment that is less invasive is worth more than any of the cost savings that might exist with this bill in general. And the important fact that Rep. Kilcoyne mentioned about Mass Health, out of the 7 million Massachusetts residents, Mass Health is our public system, out of the 7 million Massachusetts residents, 2 million are covered by Mass Health in Massachusetts. And of those 2 million, nearly 1 million of them are children. So making sure that we extend this coverage to all insured individuals, all 98% that we have in the Commonwealth, particularly those on Mass Health, is going to be so important for the quality of life of low income and Black and brown communities in Massachusetts.
Yeah, I think I'm so glad you brought that up, because the bottom line of this bill is equity. Your income, your race, your gender should not determine the kind of care that you'll receive in the Commonwealth, and it certainly shouldn't determine your health outcomes. So thank you for mentioning that too.
I just want to quickly mention, because Rep. Kilcoyne and Jake have both talked about the finances and numbers and paying for things. We talked about 55% of our budget is on healthcare. And Rep. Kilcoyne saying we only have so much money in the cities and towns. We have to pass a 2.5. That's an override of the current tax structure. Basically, Massachusetts, unlike the federal government, we have a constitutional amendment that we have to have a balanced budget. And then the same thing for our cities and towns. So we cannot pass a budget that exceeds the revenues that we're expecting to come in. So we are constitutionally required to maintain some fiscal accountability. Now, that doesn't always play well when we're trying to offer programs out that, like on this bill that they're sponsoring.
I think that's a really important point for our audience and our listeners also to know in the nuances of when there's a good idea. You know, these three industry and academics have great ideas. And why is it not just so simple? Why isn't it common sense? Why isn't it just happening? If it's so clear, there's always these complications about costs, give and take. If you're doing it in healthcare, are you taking away from roads? If there's, vaccine costs, are you taking away from, school lunches, things like that? And it's really important for scientists to remember that there is a lot of complexity in passing a bill that you all have to think about.
Actually, going to what you're just talking about, now we all saw the big, beautiful bill passed. There's all sorts of reasons that why we cannot act as legislators, but it's called federal preemption. That where the federal law, the federal law is the overriding statutory governance of that, whatever policy area. If we just saw in the big, beautiful bill, and this applies to AI, they tried to get an AI 10-year moratorium prohibiting states to pass any sort of, again, guidance, basically regulation on artificial intelligence type of technology. So this is where sometimes on the state level, you could see us trying to file legislation, and then we get told by Senate counsel, we have a council that reviews everything before that, hey, look, there's federal governance on this. We can't do anything here in the state on this because of the federal preemption. So there's other aspects that sometimes prohibit us from acting upon policy initiatives.
Okay, audience participation time. No shy people. Okay, great.
Hi, thanks for the panel. A lot of interesting responses. My question has to do with AI and healthcare, but from a slightly different perspective, and goes towards a point that Senator Moore made about the resource-intensive nature of AI. So my question is, AI is very resource-intensive. It requires a lot of water, exacerbates healthcare costs in a different sense by, increasing burden on the energy grid, exacerbating issues with climate change. So how does that play a role in the guardrails that you'd put on AI if the ubiquitous use of AI in different sectors of our life would also increase healthcare costs by putting a burden on resources that people have, or increasing heat or decreasing access to water? How does that play a role in policy making around AI guardrails?
That's a very important point, and I'm glad that Senator Moore brought it up because of the fact that my sister yells at me anytime I use it, saying how much energy I'm using and how much water for just that simple, thing that I'm putting into ChatGPT to explain something. Our energy grid here in Massachusetts transitioned away, and we have goals that the Commonwealth has set by 2030 to reduce in half our carbon footprint, which means that Massachusetts, like many Northeast states, we have transitioned our energy sources away from things like coal that burned significantly and was part of our portfolio 20 to 30 years ago. We don't have that anymore. Governor Healy recently filed a bill just a couple months ago, getting at to the other point that Senator Moore made about rising electricity costs. I have all electric utilities in my place, and I was paying for a tiny, less than 1,000 square foot place, close to $1,000 last winter per month, just to keep the heat and the lights on and the electricity. That is pricing people out. So as we begin to diversify that grid, we need to look at other technologies. We thought that offshore wind would have been a potential to add to the grid there. Now that we're losing credits from the federal government, those proposed offshore wind sites are now going to the back burner. Rep. Kilcoyne and I went up to Montreal just a few months ago to look at Canadian hydroelectric. So in the Hudson Bay, they have massive facilities, one of the largest in North America that we actually visited. Tariffs coming in will prevent us from accessing the Canadian grid that they are generating, that they sell partly to Massachusetts right now. All of that to say is that we don't have the infrastructure and the grid that's necessary in order to accommodate all of these changes in technology, and the impact that it has on the exacerbation of climate change continues to be something that impacts all of us. I represent the city of Springfield. City of Springfield for nearly a decade was ranked as the asthma capital of the United States. Now I think it's number 14 or 15. We need to be completely mindful of just the ability for us as Massachusetts to accommodate all this changing technology, and for the grid not being kept up with it, and how it perpetuates climate change and the impact and the cost that's going to have on all of us. We're a coastal state with rising sea levels. We have seawalls that are failing. We have king tides that are taking out areas. That's going to cost us more. So as we rely more on technology, as we rely more on AI, the ripple effect that that's going to create, even if we see savings on it, could impact our everyday lives and the constituents that we represent. It's a fair point. I don't have a complete answer on it. Take a look at Governor Healey's energy proposal. She actually has some interesting ideas in it, including eliminating a law that was passed by the voters in the early 1980s regarding nuclear energy. I'm not going to speak towards nuclear energy right now. I will say I have some serious concerns with it and where that leaves us as a nation. But I think states are trying to grapple with the need to diversify that grid, and looking at things like nuclear energy is what Governor Healey plans to do in that bill. Obviously, she doesn't determine things. We're not like the federal government where you can sign a bunch of executive orders. We have the power of the purse strings in the legislature. We have the ability to make laws, not the governor, not the president. So as she begins to roll out these proposals on the grid and the energy use, we need to keep in mind the future of all this technology and how that will impact us going forward.
I will just briefly add too, is that sometimes with policymaking, it's worth looking at small changes that could sometimes lead to incremental progress. So I'm about to tell a slightly embarrassing story, but I did not know when ChatGPT and AI and all this stuff was starting to come out, and it was kind of like being used and consumed by the masses, about the environmental impact, in part because when you use something like an AI thing on your computer, it's an instantaneous response. Like, you don't understand what is happening behind the scenes to make that work. So for instance, one time my friends and I, as a joke, or my colleagues, I guess, but as a joke, I was on ChatGPT to describe like funny, like redesigns of my campaign lawn signs to see like what it would spit out. And then I was just like texting it to my friends, and I didn't think anything of it. And later I understood and learned that what I thought was sort of like a funny joke probably cost millions in water and in energy expenses. And so I think that it's probably true that many people don't know what the impact is of this technology. And it's not to say that it would do enough to change it, but like even in your own life, making sure you're telling your friends and family what the environmental impact is in terms of how much water is needed on these servers to actually type in like a letter or something that you're using. What seems like such a low level task is actually so time consuming and energy consuming. And on a state level, in terms of a policy level, and again, this is something that still costs money, but it's sometimes a low cost thing that we do. We'll do things like awareness campaigns. So something like even as small as putting out a paid ad on the internet. In the old days, it used to be even posters just that would describe or put out notices of a public awareness campaign to make sure people understood what was happening and what it is, what the carbon footprint is in their own life. Because while it wouldn't stop, I think, or do enough to combat the concerns on climate change, I think I would bet there's a lot of people that don't know what the environmental impact of this technology is. And if they did know, they might be a bit more hesitant to use it unless it was absolutely something necessary.
So that's really, go ahead.
I just got one
Go
quick
ahead.
thing too, is that we're impacted now by the federal government too. They're trying to change different policy, regulatory schemes. So that as Senator Oliveira talked about, with the tariffs, Canada has so much hydro power that they're willing to sell to us. But because of the federal, right now, the climate atmosphere going on with the federal government, that's also going to be impacting what our abilities are going to be also.
Great discussion about complexities. So oftentimes we think about policy making done by elected officials, but actually, where do you two, CEOs and founders of businesses, where is your policy making in terms of, are you going to run out of electricity? Are you going to be stymied if things are throttled? If you can only use AI during peak times, not peak times, things like that. So what are your companies doing to thinking about, the future of AI and data and privacy? What is your policy making?
Well, before I answer the question, I want to just give a little context. The question that was put forth today, that your doctor might be an algorithm. How many people think that's a bad thing? Your doctor being an algorithm. Some people think that's a bad thing. Oh, two of the three legislators think it's a bad thing. Your doctor being an algorithm.
Your next doctor could be an algorithm was our catchphrase that ChatGPT suggested might be attracting viewers.
You don't like that? No. So the dean himself doesn't like it.
Should you be worried?
Okay, but I must say to you, as a surgeon and a data scientist, I would love for my doctor to use algorithms. All right. So the idea here is that we're in a situation that you're talking about where we're using a lot of energy, like ChatGPT and stuff. So we're using it around the process, but we're not using it for the process. And we have to get to a position where we're using this energy for good, right? So when we get to a situation, and what you asked about policy, when we get to a situation where we're able to use those algorithms to treat patients, because what happens if you use the correct algorithm for the correct patient? You will get better outcomes. That is the actual goal, right? Like, think about a good doctor. You see, suppose you're my doctor, I go to you. You might be the smartest person in the world, but if you have the ability to have the collective experience of millions of patients who came with my exact problem that you haven't actually seen before, then you're going to be a better doctor for me. And that's what we have to not be afraid of. We have to understand that this is actually going to make care better. But the trick is going to be, and that's where we all will need your help, is to get out of where we are right now, which is where we're AI and these other things are not fully embedded in care. So we're wasting a lot of energy, we're wasting all that water without actually getting the full benefit of it. And so when you ask what my hope is, I hope is that we're able to get AI and these things embedded into care faster. And let me give you one example of the thing that's studied the most, and that is radiology interpretation. So everybody was saying that you're going to have X-rays now completely read by AI, and radiologists are going to go out of business. That's what people thought. But if you think about these specialties that have the highest reimbursement right now and where there's the highest demand still, it's actually radiology. And turns out, because so many new therapeutics and other things have come up that completely rely on radiology. So now their new Alzheimer's drugs, they all require MRIs every 6 months. And so somebody has to read them. There's no way the current radiologists can do it. So they need AI augmentation to do their job better. So we can get there. It's just that we have to get through this sort of, I would call, transition period where we're spinning our wheels a lot. And once we are able to really take that AI and put it into these algorithms, we're actually going to do better. So I actually loved what you said. It's just that we shouldn't be freaked out by this. Somebody called it a creepy picture there.
Has some intense eyes.
Right. By the way, my daughter's in the audience, and you mentioned about no cell phones in schools. She gave you a pretty sly eye there. So yeah.
I held my nose.
Great. Tom?
For me, I go back to the point I made earlier around the data, which is that I'm not as worried about, and hadn't really been, frankly, so focused on the limitations of how much compute we need. That is an issue. It's been addressed by others. But these algorithms are only as good as the data. And so the concerns we talked about earlier, we have to resolve those in order to make sure that these algorithms are given the right data to do their job, which is to serve us. So that's my kind of ivory tower moment here, is to say, let's get better at getting the right data available, accessible, respecting patient privacy, doing all the things we want to do to protect individuals, but get the data available to the people that can turn it into the value that we can see.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'll do one question, then final question.
Hi, I have a question kind of related to what you just said, that the AI is only as good as the data we feed it. And thinking about that data that we're feeding it, how do we kind of vet for the inevitable biases that exist in the human data that we're giving it? And is there any thought about processes we can implement to kind of vet for racial, gender biases, et cetera, and just to make sure that we're not kind of widening the disparities that AI can introduce to healthcare?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing is diverse sets of people need to be in the data set to start. So if we are, I mentioned this earlier, something that we've seen in prostate cancer, Black men are disproportionately not benefiting from biomarker testing. And so then more Black men die from prostate cancer disproportionately to other populations. So step one is making sure that whether it's biomarker testing, the other thing, that's actually a big part, which is why I perked up right at the beginning of this whole panel, was that if you don't do biomarker testing on everybody, then you don't have the data to learn the models that are required to discover the drugs for the people. So I think that's the first thing. Can we use AI to look for bias? I think that's I'm not an expert in that aspect of AI, but I would think that would be another thing that we should try to do is, are there ways to train AI to look for bias and root it out and say, hey, this data is not up to par for our training because it's missing this component or that component, or it misrepresents a particular population, that sort of thing. So I think there are things we can do. First of all, we have to care that that's an issue. If we don't care, it's not going to get fixed. I think people here do care, so that's good. And then I think these types of things can help address it, but we have to kind of stay on top of it.
I was just going to add one thing. A lot of work on healthcare disparities actually has come from here at BU, at Harvard Medical School. I used to work at a place called the Center for Surgery and Public Health, where we showed that even after traumatic injury, where you think everybody gets the same care, turns out that there's significant disparities, and that African Americans, Black Americans end up doing 20% worse after getting the same kind of injury. Now, of course, we used to do a lot of work, and I, for example, my lab had lots of research efforts, and I'm sure you're suffering from this as well, that focused and used the words DEI in them. All of that is paused, right? All of that. If they haven't been taken away, that's been paused. And so my request to you, and I'm so glad you asked this question, is we have to continue to work to take away those pause and not let the whole movement that has happened over the past few decades to fix these wrongs that have occurred over decades. We have to not be afraid and just let all that go away. We have to get back to where we thought that this was an important issue and actually continue to study it. So we have to, I don't know how we're going to do this to say DEI isn't a bad word, but unless we go back to caring about it, we will not be able to solve the problems that you just raised.
They're going through and having to eliminate the word bias from documents at the federal level. Okay, so selection bias is, many people know what that is in this room. That can't be a term in these documents. So we're dealing with at another level, some kind of really difficult constraints that our state legislators have to wrestle with. We talked about federal preemption. very difficult, if that's what's happening at the federal level, to do things that can help everybody here in the audience and all the patients we want to serve. So it is really an issue.
I want to go back to the question. It's a really good question. I mean, Senator mentioned the cost of training and doing inference on this model, but I want to go one step back. So many of these recent model, especially what you have heard about it, probably foundational model, requires a lot of data. And if you have been involved in making large-scale data sets, and you know about our healthcare system, you know that it's quite scattered. Like, for example, radiology images are stored in different systems than electronic health record. And to build this type of system, you need an infrastructure to link them together, and you need to be compliant with the regulation. So you need not only you need a technical infrastructure, you need a legal infrastructure to protect you. Now the problem here is that if you over-regulate this domain, the only people who go after building this type of large-scale structures are very well-resourced hospitals. So who's going to be left out because they don't have the resources? Community hospitals. BMC is an example. And who BMC hospitals and community hospitals have? Low income. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You increase the regulation, and without knowing the consequences, then it results in like community hospital lefting out because they don't have the resource. The data will be biased and the model will be biased. So in order to build this, you have to know that even building this, like forget about training it, that's also already resource intensive. Building it is very expensive. And it seems that our regulation and our policy is not really intended to, perhaps unintentionally, not intended to help innovation, but more like a legal protection. And the unwanted consequences is that community hospital left out, you have end up with the biased data set, biased models.
I just want to quickly add to that, to comment on what all of you are rightfully pointing out about policies in terms of certain words like diversity or bias being eliminated. For all of you here, our government is a reflection on what you care about. Politics, I know that sign says politics aside, but all politics and policy is a reflection of what the people care about. So I know there's students probably from all over the country here. Do not be afraid to call the people that represent you, no matter who they are, to talk about what your lived experience is in your profession, whether it's what you see your patients, what you care about your future, because at some point, government in our country, we have a democratic government, and it's always changing, and it will change based on how people vote and what they care about. And the reason why the country is what the policies that we're seeing, the reason why they're being implemented today is because that's how people voted. But that doesn't always have to be the case. And don't underestimate having conversations with your own friends and family about the things you care about in medical policy, healthcare policy, and don't underestimate that can make a difference.
Just quickly, I guess this is where the confusion comes with regulation and guidance and what legislators or policymakers aren't looking to do. We're not looking to establish regulations on what research is being done. And this is where the confusion comes in from industry. They're saying, oh, you're going to stifle innovation, or you're going to hurt the community health centers. We're trying to establish regulations so that, or guardrails, so that bias cannot be used in the implementation of, or the application of the AI. So this is where industry and policymakers have to come together and make sure we're speaking the same language and understanding the same direction we're trying to do in the policy. Because there's nothing, as the doctor talked about, we all want AI used in health determinations. We just want to make sure that that AI that's being used, they are not making the final decision. He is. That's where the cost savings come in. So I don't know where the costs come in or how that stifles innovation, but that's the problem we have with policy and industry right now. When we're trying to establish the guidelines or the regulatory structure to protect against these inadvertent type of biases or against DEI that we're getting. Oh, you're going to stifle innovation. You're going to hurt research. What we're looking to do should not stifle any sort of research or should not put any more financial burden on community health hospitals or any other industry.
Great, thank you. This leads in well to the final question comment. So at National Science Policy Network and with our collaboration at Boston University with our civic scholars, we want to incorporate the knowledge and discovery of scientists into the practical policy making that the elected officials are doing. And the National Science Policy Network is that bridge to provide you, the policymakers with expertise, but also the ability to have the opportunities to communicate with you. So the final question for all 6 of you is, how can we help? How can we actually get in contact with you, whether we want to be in your researcher in your lab, or if we want to help think about the way that policies are being shaped, or if we want to tell you our stories so that you know what to do, or if we want you to work on precision medicine on our family's illness that could affect us in the future. How can we participate and engage with you, each and every one of you? Well, maybe we'll just go down the line as a final.
So, so I guess okay, I'm gonna put my academic hat on because as academic, so what is my role? Like my role is educator, basic scientist, translational scientist. As an educator, so my job is to train the next generation that brings service to the society, brings the next generation of innovation. So definitely investment on a federal level and a state level on the education is important because at the end, the state and the country will benefit. As a translation, as a basic researchers, of course, some of the research that we do is a public service, and it might not have immediate translational effect as a basic scientist. And I think current environment of reduction in funding eventually going to hurt the society. If the experience tells us something, is that this might be the situation that we're going to live in this administration, perhaps the next one. Maybe it's time for local legislation to think about that. Maybe we should not be relying on federal funding, and maybe state government should think about alternative ways of promoting basic research. And finally, as a translational researchers, I have the same concerns as my fellow panelists on industry, that I think one thing that helps quite a lot is that our policymakers know the entire pipeline of the innovation. The entire pipeline of innovation starts with the data and basic research, bringing research to regulation, passing the regulation, and then who benefits from this. And I think this is quite important to understand the entire pipeline, because it really to see the effect of that in the society, every part of that can be stifled or can be improved. To give you an example, I'm sure that you have heard about things like UK Biobank or All of Us, another equivalent of UK Biobank, but for the US. There are state level effort for that as well. So this is how the data is created. Who pays for it? A tax, of course. Patients are going to pay for it, and because through their health insurance, government and universities by cost sharing and funding research, and industry by bringing it to life. So I think one thing that incentivizes patient to participate in this study is to return it back, is some structure that return it back to the patient and taxpayers. And I think currently there is no pipeline aware policy, in my opinion, that okay, at the end, let's say that you innovate, because many of these data sets are developed and they use and reuse multiple times. How they are going to return this back to the to the patient. I'm not talking necessarily about money. I'm talking about maybe better license structure that incentivize patient to participate so that it's not adversarial, it's not zero-sum game.
Just to add to what you said before, I think it's important that all of us are accessible. Elected officials, particularly at the state level, are accessible. We're not sitting in Washington, D.C. We have personal emails that you can email us. Mine is just jacob.oliveira@masenate.gov. Be careful with the E and the I in my last name. It throws everybody off. But we're accessible. Rep. Kilcoyne, Senator Moore, myself, we represent constituencies. So the most effective way to contact our office is to have somebody from our district contact us. We value that more than anything else. So if you live in your respective community, whether it's here in Boston or whether it's in a suburb or outside, feel free to email your elected official, whoever represents you where you live. When we see that as elected officials, we put that at the top of our inbox because we know politics is a two-way street. If we don't respond to our constituent, we're not likely to get reelected 2 years from now. We're all on the ballot every 2 years. So responsiveness to our local communities is so essential. We all have office numbers, offices at the State House. Leave us a voicemail. I will guide against one thing. You probably have been on social media. You probably are in an industry and you see these things where it says, contact your state senator or state representative and tell them no. And you click this button. You click that button, it sends one of us an email. Let me tell you, that's not personal whatsoever. A lot of times, it's not even going to the right legislator. The most effective way to contact your legislator is look up who represents you on the Secretary of State's website or the legislature's website. Type in your address, and it'll spit out where you live in our district with our contact information. Engage with them. Engage with them at a personal level to build a relationship. Don't engage with us with a one click that you might see. Most of the time we see those, and half the time the people who are clicking on them don't even know they're sending it to us. And when I was new to the House with Rep. Kilcoyne, I would see constituents, people that I knew within my community, who I would say to them, I was like, oh, thank you for that email you sent me. And they had no clue what I'm talking about because they didn't even know it went to me. So the most effective way to contact your legislator is make it personal. Make it from you. Speak from the heart. Tell your personal story, and your elected officials will respond to it. Back to what you mentioned before, and I think you have a very important point, saying that the federal government, we cannot rely on them as much as we did before. Problem I have with that, though, is that Massachusetts is a net sender of taxpayers to Washington, D.C., meaning high-income states like Massachusetts, New York, California, these places, for every dollar we send to Washington, D.C., we only get about 70 cents back on it. To me, that's not fair. And so if we're sending all these dollars to Washington, D.C., you better believe we should be getting money back from them. And as Senator Moore mentioned before, we cannot pull out the credit card and run up debt in Massachusetts to pay for the priorities that we have. Only the federal government can do that. So the capacity for states to actually be taking the role of the federal government is so difficult right now that it puts states in such a terrible bind, because we understand as costs rise, all of us are going to be impacted by it. But I think when we fight with folks in Washington, D.C., our federal delegation continuously fights for those resources because we need those dollars back, because we are a state that doesn't get back as much as we send in.
Thank you. And thank you for explaining how that all works about contacting your legislator. For me, my email is adil.heather@bostonhealth.ai. You're welcome to email me or look me up on LinkedIn or Twitter. And also, I got to just make one confession here. This is the first time I'm actually talking as a Boston Health AI person versus being a dean of a medical school or being a professor. I still am a professor, so it's a little tough to actually swallow that. But I just say that it's, I personally have made the jump into trying to build something that would have that would improve access to care from a business standpoint, just because I feel like it's a faster way to get to more patients. So it's a trial thing, But well, I guess I'll see how it goes. If all fails, then I'm still a surgeon. So there we go.
And you have jobs for people, right? Okay.
So I actually got a little ahead of this question, I think already, but I'm glad you asked it because again, and because I want to reiterate, in my experience as an elected official, I see so many people that feel so disengaged and disheartened of their ability to enact change, and I understand why. Sometimes it feels like, why even bother to go vote? Why bother to reach out to a legislator? They don't care what I think, but it does matter, and all of your voices matter, and your experiences matter, and that will, in one way, shape, or form, make a difference on the policymakers that are here to represent you. Senator Oliveira, I think, beautifully explained how accessible we are, and also touched on, I think, how our decisions that we make on policy are driven by the people that we represent. But the same is true for those in Congress as well. So, there's talk about the federal government and how that could impact the states and how that's going to trickle down to everybody. That could be a whole other panel, so I don't want to dive into that. But the reason why these things are happening, the reason why there's policies that are going to impact care in Massachusetts and across the country is because that is who the voters elected. And I can say as a lawmaker, we vote based on what we think our constituents want. And if we're not hearing from our constituents, we're either going to make a decision that is not reflective of the population or is ignoring a swath of the population that isn't reaching out to us. And sometimes you'll find that people that are opposed to something tend to be a lot louder than people who aren't. But hearing from all of those voices matter so deeply. It's funny you brought up the one-click thing, and just to reiterate what the senator said, I one time got one of those from my dad, and I knew that he didn't send it because he wrote me an email to my State House account, and it was signed with his full name and home address. And I texted him. I was like, Dad, you can call me. I'm going to see you at dinner tomorrow. And he didn't even know he had sent the email. And I'm glad he didn't, because he was telling me to vote against something that I was planning on voting for. My dad is not of the same political persuasion as I am, but it does lead for spirited debates. But it just goes to show that we really do need to hear from you. And I've learned this with biomarker testing. I'm sure you've seen this in your field too, that policy isn't always about being the experts. We need the experts to help inform us of how this is going to have a practical impact on care and whatnot. But what moves people, what drives policy, is hearing the human cost and the human impact. And all of you here, whether it's in your personal lives or your education background or your profession, you will see on the ground what these policies mean for the people around us. And to hear from students, like I mentioned earlier with biomarkers, we have arranged a broad coalition of support to try to get this over the finish line. So the senator and I work with doctors, we work with patients, we both speak to other legislators about and patient advocates about our own loss and experience with rare disease, with Alzheimer's, with cancer. And those are the things that moves people. And so I know I'm kind of going on, but I just know all of you I'm assuming you look relatively young, you're students. So I'm assuming you're, just starting your career. And I know it can be scary to pick up a phone and try to call someone, or easy to dismiss your own ability to get things done. But sometimes in policy and in elections, one vote can make the difference. We certainly see it in our state at a smaller level. So that vote could come from you having a conversation with somebody. That one vote could have come from a phone call that you made to your lawmaker to vote on a certain way on a bill, or support funding a certain initiative, or supporting healthcare. I'm on healthcare financing, and we hear from we hear hours of testimony from patients and doctors that help us inform what bills that we're going to move forward and help make really tough decisions. And I think that, I don't want anyone to ever feel discouraged about getting involved, but I also do caution that advocacy sometimes is lifelong work. Policymaking is lifelong work. And don't underestimate the power of your voice to make a change that will lead to another change, that will lead to another change. And that'll hopefully make our healthcare system better going forward. And all of us are, no matter what our backgrounds are, whether we're sitting here on this panel or in this audience, we're all trying to work towards the same thing, and we all need each other for various reasons. So just don't dismiss your own ability to make change, and never dismiss that. And also, try to take a breather when things seem overwhelming and scary, because I certainly that we see that, we have a lot of challenges in front of us that we're trying to solve, and you can't get everything done at once, but just don't give up.
Well, first, thanks everybody for a great discussion. It's been entertaining. I've learned some things, which is great. Easy to reach me. There's 5 Neyarapalis in the United States. So you can just Google me and you'll find me one way or the other. Tom@archetypetx.com if you want to reach me at my work email address. I want to leave on a positive note, which is I've been watching, we now call this AI, and people kind of think that AI just arose from nowhere, but really there's been this continuation of advanced analytic approaches that have been developed over the last 25 years since I've been involved in this. And the bigger arc, the longer arc, if I can paraphrase, is headed in the right direction, which is that the amount of acceleration in the last few years in being able to discover things from data using AI is unbelievable. It's the equivalent in science of what people in the room see with ChatGPT and other things. It's unbelievable if you step back and think about 5 years ago where we are now. We can actually, if not cure, we can render cancer a chronic illness for everybody in the next 5 years. If we do the right things legislatively, if we do the right things in businesses, we make the right decisions. These are the types of things that can happen if this kind of group of people can work together. So actually, I'm pretty hopeful about the future. I do think we need more of these types of discussions. I haven't been on a panel with legislators before, so that's kind of exciting for me. But I actually see some opportunities here that I'm going to follow up on. So thank you, everybody, and appreciate the time.
Thank you. I think the best way for us to move forward with policy initiatives is to have more forums like this. We need partners, so bring the industry into the State House. As I said, we have 600-800 bills. Every bill has to have a hearing. So we have to advertise when the hearings are going to take place, what bills are being heard. So this takes some work on behalf of our constituents and also the industry stakeholders, that they have to pay attention. And when they see a legislation coming forward that they think applies to their industry, reach out to us. You can show up at the hearing and testify. You can call and schedule a meeting with us or our staff. Now I say us or our staff because we could be out during the day at one of these forums, and our staff could handle the meeting with you. It's no disrespect for you. We just, we haven't perfected cloning yet. So, we just can't be in multiple places, but we put a lot of respect and confidence in our staff and what they're going to give us for feedback. So there's that avenue. And I think Meghan, Jake talked about this. It's the personal contact. I always tell groups that come to the State House, there's nothing more impactful than someone sitting down, whether it's in the State House and I tell people, look, call my office, I'll meet you for a coffee. And not just one issue, do it on multiple issues so that we build a rapport. And if there's an issue that comes up that I need advice on, and I know that you actually do this on a day-to-day basis, we'll reach out to you because we're going to hear information from the other side. We'll reach out to you and say, hey, look, this is what we're being told. Tell us how it applies on the day-to-day application of this. Now, when you do that, obviously you have to be honest with us on how it applies, because then you become a resource to us. As Rep. Kilcoyne talked about, we are not experts in every area. It's just impossible. There's no one here that would be an expert in every area. So we have to put our trust in the information that you're going to give us. So every one of us, we're all there with good intentions. We all there want to address the needs of our constituents, but communication works both ways. We have Facebook, we have Instagram, we have LinkedIn. Staff monitor that. So if you send a message, our staff can get, hey, look, we got this message from this person, or an email. But like Senator Oliveira said, that we could have an issue come up. We get emails and messages from people from all over the country. So we then have to take the time to filter through, okay, this is a constituent. This is something that, someone that we have to deal, I should say, have to deal with, want to deal with. So there is that aspect of it. But again, putting a face to an issue, I think is so much more impactful to a legislator. Because it's not just hearing, hey, look at the data. Data is important, but hey, look, the data says A, B, and C. Well, okay, that's great. But I want to hear from that person who actually had the impact in their daily life on what that data actually means. The only other thing I wanted to discuss, when you talked about, the state, I guess, assuming some of the financial burden, the state, just so you know, the state passed a budget this year of like $61.8 billion. Yeah, just under 62 billion. Of that, 42 billion comes from state revenue. So the delta between the state and the 61 or 62 is federal money coming to us. And the majority of that is healthcare. So I have UMass Medical School in Worcester. They're potentially, they've already had layoffs already from the first round of NIH cuts. Depending on what this big, beautiful, the continuing resolution did. We're still waiting to see what happens there. We could see additional cuts. So going back to the research that you want to do with biomarkers and other healthcare type research, there's no way possible the state can absorb that type of cut. They're talking being anywhere up to $3 billion that we could see over the next several years in loss of federal money. So and if we take a hit, we have to have the balanced budget. So if we're gonna make up the funding for the research, are we cutting money for kids with disability, developmental disabilities? Are we cutting funding for our roads? Are we cutting funding for some other state resource? So I'd love to say the state that we have the resources to do it, but we just don't have it. And so this is where it's, as Rep. Kilcoyne talked about, it's really so important right now. I remember getting elected people for years saying, oh, Washington does nothing. We don't, they go down there, everyone gets to speak, so nothing gets passed. Well, look, they're doing a lot right now. I think this is going to be the first time that everyone can say what Washington's doing is impacting us on Main Street, because it's going to over the next several years. So it's just very important for us to understand that, we help the cities and towns, and we have some oversight there. The federal government sends a lot of, as Jake talked about, Senator Arvilla talked about, we send more to the feds than we get back, but they have oversight and restrictions that they place on us. And if they're going to put more financial burdens on us, it's going to have impact in other places. But I do also agree that, AI, I tell my kids all the time that I wish it was their age. I can remember that when the microwave, well, actually, I can remember sitting in the black and white TV, and we had these rabbit ear antennas, and then came the microwave, and we used to sit there saying, oh, I wish we could just sit here and change the channel. TV remotes. They're going to see, and you're going to see so many things that, my generation, the baby boomers, we're never going to see. So I do think there's so much positive possibilities out there with AI.
Thank you, Senator. In respect of time, as a baby doctor and a researcher and a policy enthusiast, this was extremely enlightening. But I think we all have the common goal, which is making healthcare better for everyone and hopefully equitable, hopefully. So thank you all for being here today, sharing your time, sharing these insights with us. And we really hope you're able to hang around for a few more minutes for any of our attendees to interact with you. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.